of issues and circumstances there, but we've all been through there. We've all had that same spotlight shone on our lives. For many years, Prince Edward was the quiet one in the royal family. While others were in the spotlight facing drama and headlines, he stayed in the background in a silent, calm, and loyal way. But now that silence is finally broken. Edward has spoken about Princess Diana, and what he said has thrilled everyone because his words change everything we ever thought about the royal family. Join us as we unveil this long-held secret and why Edward decides to speak at this time. Prince Edward's observations about Diana. Prince Edward and Princess Diana were never the kind of royal pair that people constantly talked about. Their connection didn't stand out as especially close or filled with drama. It was as if they were walking through the same royal world, but taking completely different routes. Diana was the bright light that grabbed the world's attention. Everyone loved her, and she seemed to bring new energy wherever she went. Edward, on the other hand, was quiet and stayed in the background, rarely stepping into the center of attention. Still, even though they played very different roles in the royal family, their lives crossed paths in ways most people never noticed. When Diana first became part of the royal family in the early 1980s, Edward was still a young man. He was just watching everything happen from the side. Diana was barely out of her teens when she married his older brother, Prince Charles, in a wedding that looked like a dream to the outside world. People saw a beautiful young woman stepping into a royal fairy tale, but Edward saw something deeper. A young lady who was thrown into a world that didn't know what to do with her open heart, strong emotions, or fresh ideas about what royalty should look like. At first, Edward kept his distance. He wasn't part of Diana's inner circle, and unlike some of his other siblings, he stayed away from the family issues and drama that were happening behind palace doors. But over time, he started to notice things that he couldn't ignore. Diana was no longer just the new princess. She had become the center of attention in the royal family. People loved her instantly. Huge crowds showed up just to see her. The newspapers wrote about her every move, and it was clear that she had something special that the royal family didn't fully understand or know how to handle. Edward stood back and watched. He saw how Diana's popularity made others in the royal household uneasy. He saw the tension growing between her and Charles, not just in public, but behind closed doors, too. He began to understand that their marriage was falling apart, and it wasn't just gossip. It was real. People had different opinions about Diana. Some thought she was breaking royal rules and causing trouble. Others saw her as someone who brought real feelings and warmth to a very cold and distant world. Edward, always quiet and careful, never shared his opinion openly. He didn't stand up for her, but he also didn't speak against her. And somehow that silence said more than words ever could. He watched quietly for years, seeing how Diana's struggles became known to everyone. He saw how it drained her, how it made her suffer. And he also saw how the rest of the royal family reacted to it all. Still, he didn't speak out. He didn't step forward. He remained in the background like a family member torn between staying loyal to the institution and recognizing the real pain Diana was going through. Even if he never spoke publicly, Edward had a front-row view of the hardest years in Diana's life. For generations, the royal family followed one main rule: always keep control of the story. Their image was built on being serious, private, and staying far away from public drama. The phrase, "never complain, never explain," was more than advice. It was the way they survived. They only showed the world what they wanted people to see. But everything changed when Diana arrived. From the very beginning, she did things differently. She was young, full of life, and incredibly easy for people to connect with, something the royal family had never experienced before. While most royals hid their feelings and avoided showing emotion, Diana was the opposite. She cried in public, talked honestly about what she was going through, and admitted when she was hurting. And by doing that, she pulled back the curtain on royal life. She let people see that royals were human too, and not above the pain and problems that everyday people face. In her own quiet way, Diana changed everything, and Prince Edward, though he rarely said a word, saw it all unfold. He may not have been part of the headlines, but he was there, watching as Diana's story reshaped the royal world forever. Prince Edward didn't get involved in the royal family's inner battles, but he was there, quietly watching as everything changed because of Diana. Her rise to fame shook the palace in a way no one expected. The royal household had never faced anyone quite like her before. She was meant to stand beside Charles, supporting him quietly, but instead, she became the center of attention. Wherever she went, people shouted her name with excitement. Reporters followed her non-stop, and even world leaders seemed more eager to meet Diana than the royals themselves. With every step she took, her fame grew bigger. But behind the palace gates, the pressure built up too. Suddenly, the royal family wasn't the main focus anymore. Diana was. And that created a serious problem. The monarchy had always relied on tradition, on sticking together and keeping private matters hidden. They didn't like change, and they didn't like anyone sharing their personal struggles with the public. But Diana didn't care about those rules. She spoke honestly about how lonely and unloved she felt. She told the world how hard it was to live under royal expectations. She said things no royal had dared say before, and people loved her for it. Prince Edward, always calm and quiet, noticed everything. He saw how the royal family tried to keep up, but the world was moving on, and they weren't ready for it. He noticed how Diana's truthfulness revealed something deeper, that the royals couldn't change with the times. For years they had shaped their image carefully, showing only what they wanted the public to believe. But Diana was different. No one could control her. Her honesty was the reason people loved her, and it also became the biggest challenge the monarchy ever faced. She touched people's hearts in a way the rest of the royal family never managed to do, and that made her more than just a problem for Charles. It made her a risk to everything the monarchy stood for. The more they tried to hold her back, the clearer it became that their control was slipping. Their power over how they were seen by the world was slowly fading away. Edward didn't speak about any of this back then. He kept his thoughts to himself, but he was there, watching everything happen. And years later, when he finally spoke about those days, it became clear that Diana had left a mark that would never fade. She had completely changed how people viewed the royal family, and Edward had seen it all unfold quietly from the sidelines. Prince Edward saw clearly how Diana's presence both protected and shook the royal family's long-standing image. Diana did something no royal before her had ever done. She made the monarchy feel real and close to the people. For generations, the royals had lived behind thick curtains of formality and tradition. They were not meant to be seen as ordinary people with feelings, but rather as distant figures, symbols of power and history. But Diana changed all of that. She wasn't cold or hidden behind palace gates. She was kind, full of emotion, and unafraid to show love and care in the open. Instead of just waving from balconies, she walked right into the arms of crowds. She smiled, held hands with strangers, and looked directly into people's eyes. That simple human touch was something the public had never seen from a royal before. It felt refreshing. To ordinary people, Diana brought the crown closer. She made them feel seen and heard. It was powerful. But inside the palace, this was no small shift. It was seen as a serious problem. Diana's ability to reach people on a personal level was something the royal family had never experienced. She wasn't acting out of duty. She acted from the heart. Diana did more than attend royal events. She visited sick patients when others were too afraid. At a time when people misunderstood AIDS and were terrified of touching those who had it, she shook their hands and hugged them. She entered dangerous minefields to draw the world's attention to innocent lives lost in war zones. She didn't do these things for attention. She did them because she deeply cared. The world noticed. People loved her for it. She wasn't just a princess. She was a global light, someone who made the monarchy feel more human and current. Yet inside the royal household, her rising popularity became a threat. The monarchy had lasted through the centuries by being reserved and distant, keeping their lives hidden from the public eye. Diana turned that idea upside down. She wore her heart on her sleeve. She cried. She admitted when she was hurting and mostly spoke from her soul. That honesty made her unpredictable. And for a family that had always preferred silence and order, Diana's open nature caused discomfort. Prince Edward, unlike his brother Charles, seemed to understand what made Diana special. He realized she was not just another royal with a title. She was someone who had captured the entire world's attention. But Edward didn't try to control or stop her. He stayed quiet, keeping his thoughts to himself while others in the family tried hard to silence her influence. He watched her trying to balance royal expectations with her need to be free. But in the end, that balance became too hard for her to hold. Her independence was her strength, but it also brought her the most pain. She couldn't accept being shaped into a silent, smiling princess. She spoke her truth. She opened up about her struggles. She let the world peek behind the palace walls. But the royal family wasn't ready for such honesty. This leaves a big question. Did Diana harm or help the monarchy? Just continue watching to find out. Was Princess Diana a harm or a help? According to reports, some believe that Diana rescued the monarchy. Before she arrived, people were starting to lose interest in the royal family. They seemed outdated and distant. But Diana gave them meaning again. She brought warmth, attention, and a spark that made people care. She pulled the monarchy into a new era. And whether the royal family liked it or not, she changed how the world would see them forever. Diana didn't just make people care. Some believed she also revealed something the royal family had kept hidden for too long. By sharing her pain from behind palace walls, she let the world see that the monarchy wasn't as perfect as it appeared. People began to understand that behind all the luxury and crowns was a system that felt cold, strict, and unwilling to grow. That honesty left a deep mark. Even now, the royal family is still trying to fix the image that began to fall apart during Diana's time. Prince Edward never picked a side in this quiet storm. He wasn't like Charles, next in line for the throne. Nor was he like Diana, bold enough to go against tradition. But he was there. He saw everything. Though he never gave interviews or made bold public thoughts, his silence didn't mean he wasn't paying attention. He stayed in the background. But even from the sidelines, he noticed the cracks in the royal image long before the rest of the world did. Everything came crashing down on August 31st, 1997. That day, the world froze. The news spread everywhere that Princess Diana had passed away in a car crash in Paris. It was sudden, it was tragic, and it broke hearts around the globe. People poured into the streets in shock and sorrow. All through the night, candles flickered in quiet vigils. Outside Kensington Palace, people brought flowers faster than anyone could count. They didn't know her personally, but they felt like they had lost someone close. Diana wasn't just a member of the royal family. She stood for kindness, hope, and change. And now she is gone. The pain was impossible to ignore, but while the public was drowning in grief, the royal family stayed silent. Their lack of emotion became a disaster unlike anything they had faced before. The world watched, waiting for some sign of heartbreak from the royals. But nothing came. No words, no lowered flag at Buckingham Palace, no tears. The family stayed hidden behind thick walls, clinging to traditions that suddenly felt cold and heartless. They followed old customs like nothing had changed, but the world had changed. And this time, their silence only made things worse. People were furious. Why wasn't the Queen saying anything? Why was Charles so quiet? Did the royal family even care? Newspapers blasted them. Famous voices called them out. Even those who had always supported the monarchy started to wonder if the royals had lost touch with the people they were meant to represent. Through all this, Prince Edward stayed as quiet as ever. He was heartbroken, but his pain wasn't on display. He wasn't Diana's husband like Charles. He wasn't her son like William or Harry. He was her brother-in-law, someone who had watched her closely, who had understood her battles in ways others hadn't. And yet, he couldn't say a word. When the Queen finally spoke to the nation, it was too late to fix the damage. The silence had already spoken louder than any words could. The royal family had revealed a side of itself that people wouldn't forget. A side that felt distant, unemotional, and out of step with the world's pain. And that silence, just like Diana's voice once had, changed everything. When Diana passed away, it became a moment the royal family could no longer ignore. Her death pushed them into a new reality, one where being distant and emotionless was no longer acceptable. The world wanted real feelings, not royal formality. They had to change. They had to show they cared. That heartbreaking loss forced them to open up and prove they were human too. While the royal household scrambled to fix its public image and soften its ways, Prince Edward quietly stood in the background. He didn't step forward, didn't give interviews, and never shared what was going on in his heart. He watched everything unfold. The public heartbreak, the criticism, the family's slow shift toward a more open image, but he kept his thoughts to himself. He never said how Diana's death affected him, what he thought of the royal family's cold reaction, or how the public backlash hit the monarchy like a storm. For many years, Prince Edward stayed completely silent. The world kept talking about Diana, her legacy, her pain, her influence. Documentaries, interviews, and books filled with stories about her continued to spark heated debates about how the royal family had treated her. People still couldn't forget the coldness she faced. Edward, however, stayed in the shadows and never said a word. Until now, would you like to know what he revealed? Stay tuned. Untold Revelations about Princess Diana. After years of silence, Edward has finally spoken, and what he's shared has stunned those who follow royal news. Unlike the usual careful words spoken by royals, his statements don't sound like he's trying to protect the institution or rewrite the past. He doesn't act defensive. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. Instead, he's offered something powerful and rare. An honest, straightforward look at what really happened behind those palace doors. Edward has now admitted what many had long guessed, that Diana never truly fit into the royal system. He confirmed that the institution didn't know how to handle someone like her. Her way of being open, emotional, and honest was seen as a weakness, not a strength. Behind closed doors, she faced resistance, isolation, and rejection. Not because of who she was as a person, but because the system wasn't built to embrace someone like her. Her loneliness wasn't just by accident, it was created. People are asking why Edward chose now to speak after staying quiet for so long. Some believe his timing isn't random. The royal family is once again facing big questions. Younger generations are asking if the monarchy still matters. The same problems that once surrounded Diana are being looked at again, and her memory is right at the center of those discussions. Edward's words seem to be more than just a look back. They feel like a response to what's happening now. What makes Edward's voice stand out is how different it is from others. When Charles talks about Diana, he's very formal and cautious, never going too deep. William honors his mother with respect, but keeps her story separate from his own plans as the future king. Even Harry, who is the most emotional and outspoken, talks from his own painful experiences as her son. But Edward isn't like any of them. He has no personal agenda. He's not trying to fix his image or gain public attention. His words feel calm, thoughtful, and revealing. And in just a few short statements, he confirmed something many suspected for years, that Diana's pain wasn't only about her own struggles. It was also about the walls built by the royal system. Edward's honesty has shaken things inside the monarchy. People are now wondering how much more has been hidden behind the palace's polished image. His truth-telling didn't just reopen old wounds. It struck a chord in today's conversations about the royals. Because what Edward said doesn't just change how we remember the past. It's making waves right now. In the present, Prince Edward's recent comments have done more than bring up old memories. They've reopened deep and painful wounds inside the royal family. Even though his words were calm and carefully chosen, they forced the monarchy to face one of its darkest and most sensitive times all over again. For years, the royal household has tried to reshape how people see them, distancing themselves from the pain and problems tied to Princess Diana's life and tragic passing. But with Edward finally opening up, all of that careful work may now be falling apart. Behind palace walls, the reaction has not been united. King Charles, already carrying the weight of past regrets, is said to be deeply shaken. His connection with Diana is still remembered as a major failure, one that has followed him even as he now wears the crown. What Edward has said reminds Charles of choices he once made, choices that affected Diana's life and left a lasting scar on how people view the monarchy. For Charles, this isn't just old history being revisited. It's a personal pain that never really healed. Prince William, the future king, now finds himself walking a tightrope. He's always honored his mother in his own way, but he has also tried to push the monarchy forward, away from the shadows of past mistakes. Now, because of Edward's words, he may have to decide how much of his mother's real story he's willing to face. Will he be open about the hard truths, or will he try to control the fallout? His choice could shape not only how people see him, but also whether the royal family can truly change. Then there's Prince Harry, who has spoken the loudest and most emotionally about Diana's legacy. Part of his decision to leave royal life came from the same problems that Edward has just pointed out. Harry has spent years saying that his mother was not treated fairly, and that her voice was often ignored. Edward's words might make Harry feel seen and supported, but they might also widen the distance between him and the family he left behind. After all, if even Edward, known for staying quiet and loyal, can admit these things, how much longer can the others stay silent? But beyond the personal family struggles, there's a bigger issue at play, and this brings us to the possible effects of this revelation. The outcome of Edward's revelation. His decision to speak has added more cracks to an already shaky system. People today want honesty, and the royal family is finding it hard to keep up with that demand. If someone like Edward, who's always been careful and respectful, is now ready to talk about the tough parts of Diana's story, then what else might be hiding behind palace doors? Some believe Edward's words could actually help the monarchy grow, showing that even those inside the system can admit past mistakes and learn from them. Others think it sets a dangerous example, one that could make it harder for the royals to protect their version of history. But no matter what side you're on, one thing is clear. The royal family can't just brush the past aside anymore. Edward's comments quickly made headlines. Not long after his remarks were made public, major news channels picked up the story. TV shows picked apart every line. Journalists guessed what the palace might do next. And online, social media exploded with opinions. In today's world, where every word from the royals is examined under a microscope, Edward's decision to speak became a major moment. People were split in how they reacted. Some felt Edward was finally telling the truth that had been hidden for too long. They thanked him for being brave and honest, seeing his words as a step toward healing and responsibility. For them, his message gave real voice to Diana's struggles and showed how unwilling the royal family has been to truly change. But others felt differently. They saw his comments as opening old wounds that should have been left alone. Critics questioned the timing. Why now, after all this time? Was Edward trying to change how history remembers him? Was he frustrated with the palace and using this as a way to speak out? Or was he truly trying to help? Even the media came under fire. For years, newspapers and news shows helped shape how people saw Diana. Some painted her as a sad princess, others as someone who caused trouble for the royals. But Edward's version of the story didn't match those simple labels. He didn't call Diana perfect, and he didn't make excuses for how the family treated her. She showed a more complicated picture, and that made many reporters think twice about the stories they've told. But the biggest wave came from online voices. Within minutes, people on social media started sharing thoughts, videos, and memories. Hashtags about Diana, royal secrets, and the need for honesty quickly spread around the world. Young people who weren't even alive during Diana's time began talking about her again. They compared her story to Meghan Markle's and asked if the monarchy can really survive if it keeps repeating the same mistakes. So far, the palace hasn't said anything in response, but the silence hasn't stopped the impact. The public conversation has changed again, and once more Diana's name is being spoken with strong feelings and fierce debate. Edward didn't just make a quiet comment, he reopened a chapter that many hoped was closed. His choice to finally speak after staying silent for so long marks a huge change in how the royal family deals with the past. For decades, they've believed that staying quiet was the best way to keep their image safe. But Edward has shown that silence doesn't erase what happened. It only delays the truth from being told. His words have made people talk again about Diana's pain, about how slow the royal family has been to grow, and about the high price of being part of that world. Now people are asking hard questions. Was what happened to Diana unavoidable? Could the family have protected her? And if they had done things differently, would they be stronger today or more fragile? Edward's comments may also open the door for more royals to be honest. If someone like him, who has always stayed in the background, now feels the need to speak up, should others follow? Or does sharing the truth risk shaking the very foundation the monarchy stands on? One thing is for sure, Diana's story is not over. Her memory still shapes the royal family, affects how the public sees them, and stirs strong emotions even after all these years. Thanks to Edward, her story is being looked at again, and now the world is left wondering, was Edward's truth worth the cost it may bring? Many people had different feelings about what Prince Edward shared. Some thought he was brave for finally speaking the truth, saying it was long overdue for the royal family to admit their mistakes. They felt his honesty brought a breath of fresh air to a story that had been hidden for too long. But not everyone saw it that way. Others accused him of trying to change the way people remember what happened. They believed he was softening the pain Diana went through, just to protect the royal family's image. But Edward didn't speak up to win anyone's approval or to erase anything. He simply wanted to share a side of the story that hadn't been talked about before. He understood that what he said would cause people to argue and take sides, but he felt that staying silent any longer would have been worse. In his heart, those words needed to be said. Inside the palace, people didn't all feel the same way either. For King Charles, it stirred a mix of emotions. He had already spent many years dealing with what people thought of him because of how things ended between him and Diana. What Edward said brought a strange kind of comfort, but it also reopened painful memories. On one hand, Edward helped show that Charles's side of the story was not so simple either, that he too had struggles. But on the other hand, It forced him to relive the hardest moments of his life, things he had never really healed from. Prince William was left in a tough spot. Being the future king, he always tried to protect his mother's memory while still leading the royal family into a new chapter. Edward's words made that harder. They reminded him that even though he wants to move forward, the past still has a strong grip. He had to ask himself how much truth was too much, and how far he could go in honoring Diana, without pulling the whole family back into painful memories. Prince Harry's reaction was much more intense. He saw Edward's comments as a way of watering down what Diana really went through. That only made the distance between him and the rest of his family feel even wider. But Edward didn't back away from what he had said. He wasn't looking for praise or trying to escape blame. He just wanted to speak the truth from his point of view. He believed that by telling the full story, no matter how uncomfortable, it might finally help the family heal. His intention wasn't to erase what had happened, but to understand how the choices made all those years ago were still affecting everyone today. What Edward said didn't just lead to more arguments and opinions. It also made people start asking harder questions. If this was the beginning of being honest about Diana's life, what else could come out? And now that the royal family was being pushed toward more openness, could they stay united? Like a quiet but powerful moment during a serious family talk, Edward's gentle and thoughtful words did more than start a discussion. They opened old scars that many had tried to hide for years. For King Charles, it brought back haunting memories of a time when he was at his lowest, being judged by the public and feeling ashamed. Every time someone called Diana the people's princess, it made his own image suffer more. Edward's words added a new piece to that story, showing that there were deeper layers no one had spoken about before. Meanwhile, William and Harry reacted in completely different ways. William, always thinking about what lies ahead, saw Edward's comments as a way to find peace between honoring his mother and understanding the royal family's role in her pain. He wasn't trying to erase the past, but he also knew they couldn't live in it forever. He believed there had to be a way to respect both the truth and the future. Harry, though, felt it all too personally. For him, this wasn't just about memories, it was about justice for his mother. And to him, Edward's version didn't go far enough. But no matter how each person saw it, Edward's words made one thing clear. The story of Diana still holds power, still stirs deep feelings, and still shapes the royal family's journey. Even if Edward didn't completely agree with the way some people saw things, he still understood why they felt that way. But for Harry, the situation was very different. He saw Edward's comments as just another way for the royal family to control Diana's story, not as an effort to bring peace. In his eyes, it looked like Edward was criticizing the brave choices their mother had made to protect herself and her boys. Over the years, both private moments and public interviews had made it clear that William and Harry were moving in separate directions, and Edward's words only made that gap wider. What Edward said caused more damage to the already shaky bond between the brothers. Harry felt the family often used Diana's memory to avoid facing the truth about what they had done wrong. But William took a different view. He thought Edward was trying to shed light on how complicated Diana's life had really been. Edward's words weren't just about the past, they also showed how the royal family was under more pressure than ever before. The world was changing fast, and people were now demanding honesty and responsibility. What once made the monarchy feel strong was now the very thing that made it a target. With people constantly questioning whether the royal family still mattered in today's world, the palace felt more exposed than ever. But Edward, who had always been more in touch with reality, could see this clearly. He wasn't trying to stir trouble. He was trying to help the family connect its past with its uncertain future. He knew his words would cause people to argue, but he said them anyway. And as expected, the responses were all over the place. Some praised him for being brave and for daring to speak the truth. They saw him as someone who finally said what needed to be said. Others thought he went too far, saying he had reopened old wounds that were better left alone and made it harder for the family to stay united. The media, always eager for anything involving the royals, picked apart every sentence he said. They compared it to old interviews and past statements by other family members. But Edward didn't flinch. He wasn't looking for drama. What he truly wanted was for people to understand, to see the past clearly, and to find a better way forward. Inside the palace, the reaction wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was still powerful. The Queen, who had seen countless storms during her reign, was said to be both upset and understanding at the same time. She had always believed in the strength of the monarchy, no matter the crisis. Even though she noticed something different this time, Edward's words felt like a turning point. It wasn't yet clear whether this new honesty would help the royal family or hurt them. King Charles had a heavy burden on his shoulders, as the new monarchy had to keep the traditions alive while also responding to the world's changing expectations. On one side, he appreciated Edward's courage to make the royal family appear more human and to share a fuller version of their past. But at the same time, it hurt him deeply to see old wounds reopened, especially those tied to Diana, a topic still wrapped in pain. Charles had to find a delicate balance. He needed to honor Diana's memory in a way that didn't overshadow the path forward for the royal family. But what caught Edward by surprise was how many people quietly stood by him. Some of them had known Diana personally, and they reached out to thank him. They were touched by how he spoke about her, not painting her as a flawless hero or a broken victim, but as a real person with strengths and flaws. Their messages comforted Edward. Even though speaking out had caused tension in his family, he felt some peace knowing he'd done something right. Yet the biggest change didn't happen behind palace walls or in news headlines. It happened in the hearts and minds of everyday people. For years, the story of Diana had been told in one simple way. She was the hurt one, and the royal family were the ones who caused it. But Edward's version made people stop and think. Maybe the truth wasn't so black and white. Maybe Diana was neither a perfect angel nor someone who was always powerless. She was a woman who faced a life full of pressure and had to make tough choices. Some of those choices were smart, while others were not. But in all, they were made in very difficult circumstances. As time went on and the noise of public debates faded, the royal family slowly got back to their usual duties. They went to events, supported charities, and tried to move ahead. But the questions Edward had raised didn't go away. They stayed in the background like a soft whisper, reminding everyone that the past still had lessons to teach. For Edward, it was both something to be proud of and something that weighed on him. He had done what he set out to do. You might be wondering what really made Edward open up after these years. Well, to get a reason for that, you need to keep watching. The people's speculations. Edward never wavered in his loyalty to the monarchy. He did what was expected of him, always with grace. But not everyone saw his silence kindly. Some assumed he didn't really care about Diana or understand what she had meant to the people. Others believed that his previous silence before opening up was a sign of deep loyalty to the crown, that he chose to protect the royal image over sharing his personal feelings. Since he never explained himself publicly, people were left to guess what he truly felt inside. There were quiet rumors, too. Some whispered that Edward was growing tired of hearing about Diana all the time, that he felt her story was drowning out the work the rest of the family was doing. Others thought he admired her but had mixed emotions about some of her choices. But none of those stories could be confirmed. Edward never spoke about it. And while his silence might have been mistaken for apathy, the truth was more complicated. He understood how sensitive the whole topic was, and didn't want to make things worse. Diana's life had been more than a sad tale. It had become a symbol of the royal family's struggles and strength. Edward wasn't sure he was ready to be the one to speak on something so heavy. admitting how he felt could bring consequences he wasn't prepared for. But as time passed, staying quiet began to feel heavier and harder. Years rolled on, and Edward watched as William and Harry each took different paths, shaped by their mother's memory. William, as the future king, kept her spirit alive through his charity work and quiet strength. Harry, meanwhile, wanted a life of his own. He spoke more openly about his feelings and eventually stepped away from royal life altogether. Edward could clearly see pieces of Diana in both of them, her bravery, her kindness, and her boldness in following her heart. Still, Edward stayed in the shadows, keeping his real thoughts private, sharing them only with those closest to him. But things were changing. The world wanted more openness. People were no longer satisfied with formality and tradition. They wanted honesty, vulnerability, real human emotions. That shift brought Edward face to face with something he had pushed aside for years. Could he continue holding everything in? Or had the time come for him to finally speak up? There was no sudden moment that pushed him to change his mind. No fight, no big argument. It was a slow build-up. It was just a quiet realization that he couldn't carry the weight of his silence forever. Over 2 decades, Edward had watched the world turn Diana into both a saint and a symbol. Her name had been used during moments of celebration, but also during times of pain and division. What troubled him most was how people were using her memory to stir conflict, to point fingers, and even damage the family she had once belonged to. His choice to finally share his truth wasn't made on a whim. It was shaped by years of watching his own family hurt and struggle, especially the tension between his brothers. William carried Diana's memory with both pride and quiet sorrow. Every choice he made was seen as a reflection of her. Harry took a different direction altogether. With Meghan by his side, he stepped away from the royal world, a decision that surprised many and brought Diana's story back into the spotlight. People started connecting her past struggles with the current royal issues. For Edward, it was personal. He had stayed silent for so long, focusing on raising his children and supporting them in a calm and steady way. Outside the palace, people were more interested in Diana than ever. Her story never faded from the public's mind. New documentaries and books kept bringing her back into focus, but many of these retellings made the story seem too simple. To Edward, that was the problem. They turned a deeply emotional, complicated life into a black-and-white tale of good and bad. He had seen how much love Diana had brought into the family, but he had also seen the problems that followed. He didn't decide to finally speak out because of one dramatic moment. It was something that grew quietly inside him. So what do you think about Prince Edward's revelation about Princess Diana? Do you think this revelation will greatly affect the monarchy? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.